Welcome to the Best of WatchMojo, the series that refeatures some of our biggest and best videos that you may have missed. The games are never short on drama. Welcome to WatchMojo.com, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 Olympic controversies.
In other words, doped athletes are protected by the anti-doping agency of Russia rather than suspended.
For this list, we're taking a look at the most notorious instances of cheating, violence, and political maneuvering from both the Summer and Winter Games, all of which generated worldwide discussion and debate.
Until today, she was thought to be a virtual shoo-in for the Olympics. This evening, the president of the U.S. Figure Skating Association said that Kerrigan must compete in tomorrow's initial program or she will not be allowed on the team.
We're excluding tragedies like the Munich Massacre of 1972 and Atlanta's bombing in 1996, as there is little dispute about the causes and results of those incidents.
We know that a rock concert was taking place. We know that there has been talk about an explosion from a garbage can. There's been talk that there was evacuation in the moments before it.
Number 10. Boris Onishchenko's magic épée.
After the elimination of the Soviet team as a result of Onishchenko's disqualification, hopes begin to revive.
As a distinguished, yet aging modern pentathlete and respected figure in the Soviet Union, 38-year-old Boris Onishchenko had a considerable reputation to uphold in his homeland. The pressure to perform, particularly in the Cold War era of sport, was too much to bear, however, and caused the former Army major to cheat, eventually leading to his downfall. Desperate to match his silver medal performance of 4 years prior, he altered his épée to register hits even when he wasn't making contact with his opponent.
A touch is registered when the foiled tip hits the opponent with a force of at least 500 grams.
Just as quickly as this plot was discovered, Boris the Cheat was stripped of all his sporting honors and personally reprimanded by Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev, therefore suffering the very fall from grace he was trying desperately to avoid. Number 9. Jim Thorpe's disqualification. Reportedly dubbed the greatest athlete in the world by the King of Sweden, this legendary all-rounder took gold in both the pentathlon and decathlon at the 1912 Summer Games, setting records that would endure well into the 20th century.
There must be something in the Thorpe legend for people to still be talking about him 50 years after he's dead.
The Native American and European's athletic career is defined by tales of his nonchalant excellence. His winning the high jump in mismatched shoes is one of many classic anecdotes. Yet his feats will always be tainted by the IOC's so-called elitist and potentially racist attempts to punish him for violating their Victorian rules on amateurism. Rules that white athletes apparently frequently abused without consequence.
As far as I'm concerned, he's a Simon pure athlete. You mustn't take those medals away from him, gentlemen. You mustn't.
Under serious pressure from Thorpe supporters, the IOC did eventually yield on the subject by returning Thorpe's medals in the early 1980s.
They were presented to his 7 surviving children.
Number 8. Displacement in Beijing. As far back as the year 2000, Chinese officials were implementing, quote, environmental improvement projects, a fancy phrase for the systematic demolition of Beijing's impoverished areas, resulting in the displacement of an estimated 1.5 million people for the 2008 Summer Games.
These people have been forced out of their homes to make way for profitable real estate projects.
Although the local government claimed that they moved only between 6,000 and 15,000 people, all with ample compensation, numerous reports emerged exposing the mistreatment of those unwilling to shift by heavy-handed police. Beijing's floating population, consisting of rural migrants, the homeless, and other so-called second-class citizens, were most at risk from this purported social cleansing, as the government took the opportunity to further marginalize these people.
For now, many live in neighborhoods curtained off by grey concrete walls, built, authorities say, to make Beijing prettier.
It was reported that $40 billion was spent on Olympic or corporate infrastructure, while human rights were allegedly blatantly ignored, adding to an already large list of controversies surrounding the Beijing Games.
This area will be destroyed, that's certain. We just don't know when. I thought that would happen before the Games, but apparently it got delayed, so for now we've been left alone.
Number 7. The blood in the water match. Just a few weeks before this water polo match, Soviet tanks had rumbled into Budapest to end a revolution that would claim the lives of about 3,000 Hungarians.
I was considered to be from the foreign class background, and when the communist system came into power here, I had to find the opportunity to make my way in the world.
With the hopes of restoring their country's pride, the Hungarian team devised a plan to rile the Russians up, get physical, and force them into rash decisions.
A lot of people ask, why it is that way? And I think that water polo is simply in our blood.
With Hungary leading 4-0 late in the game, the Russians decided to take matters into their own hands. Hungarian player Ervin Zador was viciously struck in the eye, sending the hundreds of Hungarians in the crowd into a frenzy that required police intervention to end. In a bittersweet finish to their games, the Hungarian team took home the gold. But they could never escape the match's political subtext, forcing many team members to find refuge in less oppressive lands.
The Hungarians are declared 4-0 winners. The semi-final showdown instantly makes headlines across the globe.
Number 6. The Russian doping scandal.
It's almost spooky. The women's 800 meters, a favorite event of the Russians that is now under general suspicion.
Details of state-sponsored systematic doping in Russia really came to light in 2014. But they were dramatically expanded upon when a former Russian anti-doping official, Grigory Rodchenkov, provided an insider's look into a conspiracy that forced him to flee to the US in fear for his life.
According to Rodchenkov, he would feed the athletes these banned substances via alcohol.
Exploiting the increased access granted by their hosting of the Games, competitors in Sochi in 2014 were allowed to dope without consequence, while their tainted urine samples were exchanged for clean ones in covert operations carried out by Rodchenkov and other shady experts.
It's a fact that we cannot prove doping among athletes through our evaluation, but we do have an indication of how widespread doping is.
He claimed that at least 15 medal winners from the 2014 Winter Olympics might be implicated. As a result of these elaborate, supposedly Kremlin-sanctioned schemes, Russia was indefinitely suspended from world sports events, and many of its athletes may miss the 2016 Summer Olympics in Rio.
But pressure is building to make Russia's sanctions stick much longer.
Number 5. Ben Johnson doping.
For Canadians, a classic "where were you" moment. Then, the positive drug test.
The men's 100 meters at the 1988 Summer Olympics in Seoul may have been labeled the dirtiest race in history, but it was also one of the most enthralling to watch.
That year, it was all about Ben Johnson versus Carl Lewis.
6 members of that all-star lineup would end up implicated in other doping controversies later in their careers. But it was Johnson, the world record holder after his 9.79-second race, who will forever be defined by the steroid use he began in 1981.
Johnson's got a great lead, he's going to win! Ben wins! Johnson! And the time is 9:79!
The Canadian was open about his long-term cheating and was rightly stripped of his gold medal. Yet to this day, he is irked to be the only one punished when the other athletes also failed drug tests.
Come and run after me, Ben. I'm right here.
He's even made conspiratorial claims, declaring that the IOC only selectively cracks down on the pervasive doping culture in athletics. But even if Johnson's allegations are true, we may never fully know.
Regardless, if you like, of what happened afterwards, the experience of that moment, the sort of the emotions that it evoked, are still there.
Number 4. Tonya Harding and Nancy Kerrigan.
Many of you will be unable to forgive me for that. It will be difficult to forgive myself.
It's no surprise that a feature-length film about this sensational incident is in the works. Containing jealousy, a hitman, and an unrelenting desire for sporting success, the tale is ready for a big-screen adaptation.
Large man, 6'2", 200 pounds, came running out, just kind of crouched when he got to her, hit her a couple times with some type of weapon.
After practice for a national championship that was crucial to determine the U.S. Olympic figure skating team, a thug hired by Tonya Harding's ex-husband and bodyguard struck Nancy Kerrigan in the leg. Since she was essentially the poster girl of the sport at the time, the attack was orchestrated to intentionally put her out of the '94 Games. Branded as the hard-working, do-anything-for-gold skater, Harding's alleged knowledge of the attack was soon exposed by the media. However, she was still allowed to perform at the Olympics. Fortunately, Kerrigan recovered from the botched attack and landed the silver at the Lillehammer Games, while Harding placed 8th, was fined, received 3 years of probation, and never skated competitively again.
But if she were here today, what would you want to say to her about all of this?
Well, if she'd let me, I'd love to give her a hug.
Number 3. The U.S. boycotts the Moscow Olympics.
The United States Olympic Committee voted to boycott the Summer Olympic Games in Moscow.
In response to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan beginning in 1979, U.S. President Jimmy Carter led an international boycott that doomed his period in office and triggered the Soviet Union's own Olympic boycott of the LA Games 4 years later.
We did our best to preserve the Games in Moscow in 1980, and we have to do the same to preserve the Games in 1984 in Los Angeles.
While the reasons behind this action were righteous and well supported, the U.S. enlisted the help of Muhammad Ali, and ultimately 65 nations joined up. The boycott did threaten the Olympic movement by embroiling the Games in the political maneuvering of 2 world powers.
Well, I'm very disappointed, but I feel that it's probably the only thing that our country can do as a unit.
25 angry U.S. athletes even sued the government for denying them a dream they worked so hard towards. And yet, Carter stuck to his morals, strengthening a stance that would later be described by the Soviet Union as, quote, anti-Soviet hysteria.
You can look anywhere around the globe and you'll find a problem where help is needed, where we could jump on a bandwagon, if you like. And I think it's just a little unfortunate that we've chosen now the Olympic Games to have a go at.
Number 2. The Olympics Black Power Salute.
My head bowed and my fist went up in the air.
It's one of the most powerful images of the 20th century, and a demonstration that has transcended many sporting events and achievements. In the medal ceremony for the 200-meter race at the 1968 Summer Olympics, Americans Tommie Smith and John Carlos, who were shoeless and had their heads bowed, each thrust one gloved hand in the air.
Tommie Smith and John Carlos's controversial demonstration stunned the world.
Smith said that the salute was meant to symbolize human rights for all, though it was taken differently by others, who believed it was actually in support of Black Power. Both athletes were expelled from the Games and greeted with hostility when they returned to the States.
We always had the happy face and the USA all across our chest to give indication that everything is smooth in America. But in fact, it wasn't smooth.
However, despite the fact that they lived in a climate where it was potentially dangerous to be openly critical of the establishment, they stood by the political statement, claiming it was their moral obligation to sacrifice their individual reputations to send a message to the millions watching at home.
A lot of black people generally were better off 10, 15, 20 years down the line because they made that stance.
Before we unveil our top pick, here are some honorable mentions.
We eventually came to know that through an Italian wiretap, an Uzbeki thug enlisted the help of a French skating official to favor the Russian pair over the Canadians at an American Olympics.
Accusations that Salt Lake City had bribed some IOC members with cash, gifts, possibly even the services of prostitutes, so it could get the 2002 Games.
United States winning their 8th consecutive gold medal. This place has gone crazy. And the world champion O'Coulter then, and this is the danger, and Decker's down. Oh, the world champion and one of the favorites is now flat out on the infield.
Number 1. The Nazi Olympics.
On virtually every other banner we saw, there was a swastika.
For 2 weeks in 1936 Berlin, the world was blinded by Nazi prosperity and hospitality, while Germany's precisely directed propaganda campaign obscured the country's anti-Semitic, racist, homophobic, and expansionist policies from view.
How can a Jew be good enough to win the Olympics? That I would have had to be afraid for my life, I'm sure.
Numerous nations that would go on to form the Allied powers were present for every carefully manufactured demonstration of fervent German pride, while arguments stating that participation in the Games would be tantamount to an endorsement of fascism went unheard. And so, despite mentions of a potential boycott, the Games went on as planned. Medals were even won by some Jewish and black athletes, but it was Hitler who truly prospered. The Reich Chancellor managed to turn the Games into an advertising campaign for his administration, with some asserting that he successfully manipulated European powers into a complacency that would allow the Nazi regime to spread across Europe in the years to come.
Everybody knew early on exactly the kind of regime Nazi Germany was, so much so that for the first time in the history of the modern Olympic Games, there was talk about boycotting these games.
Do you agree with our list? What infamous Olympic moments do you think were the most controversial?
As for 7-year-old young PE, she reportedly says that she's just honoured to have had a role in the opening ceremony in the first place.
For more sporting top 10s published every day, be sure to subscribe to WatchMojo.com.
Brazilian government health workers are investigating more than 4,000 suspected microcephaly cases that might be linked to Zika.
Do you agree with our picks? Check out these other great clips from WatchMojo and subscribe for new videos every day.